Political leaders in the coalition government are now going to have to hammer out a consensus position on tax changes, capital gains tax in particular, after the release of the final tax working group report. It proposes wide-ranging changes to the tax system, covering second properties, including the family batch, land, farms, most shares and business assets. People's primary residence would be excluded, as would the land beneath it, as well as earnings from KiwiSaver and personal assets like cars, bikes and boats. It's also recommending an income tax cut for almost all taxpayers by changing the lowest threshold. The report's prompted a furious response from business and the rural sector, with federated farmers dubbing it a mangy dog. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The salvos were fired well before the tax working group was even set up. Before the last election, Labour was forced to pledge no tax changes would come into force before New Zealanders had another chance to vote on them in 2020. The chair of the working group is former Labour Finance Minister Sir Michael Cullen, who gave a reassurance this report wasn't a jack-up from Labour HQ before getting down to business. Much of the focus has been on a capital gains tax, which he says would help address unfairness in the system.
There's fairness. Sort of basic issue, if you're on the same income, you get taxed the same amount as far as possible. There's the bias in investment which arises out of the lack of a capital gains tax.
Soon after, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson addressed the media, saying the government is not bound to accept the whole report and it's unlikely it will do so. But he's not yet prepared to rule anything in or out, except a water tax, in line with the Labour New Zealand First coalition deal.
When it comes to the question of taxation on water, the coalition agreement rules that out. What I think the section on environmental taxation does is provide some interesting insight into the way you might make decisions in the future about those issues.
Grant Robertson says political leaders will now work to come up with a consensus.
I know that Mr Peters and also New Zealand First and the Green Party are committed to working together with the Labour Party to come up with a position for this government. All of you know it is the reality of MMP that in order to pass legislation, if that's what ends up being the case here, we have to get the votes to do that.
National's finance spokesperson Amy Adams says if implemented, the recommendations could do a great deal of damage to the economy.
Up to 8 new taxes. In our minds, this is clearly an attack on the Kiwi way of life as Kiwi small businesses, batches and farms come under fire. It's a very onerous by international standards regime.
Labour's coalition partner New Zealand First has actively opposed a capital gains tax on the grounds it's unfair and ineffective. Its leader Winston Peters this week gave farmers an assurance his party would listen to their views before taking a final position. Today he was giving nothing away.
We're going to read the report, take serious advice on what tax experts and others think of that, and more importantly, consult the business and the working end of town. And when we've known what the people have said, we'll make a decision by the end of April.
Are you willing to shift your position at all from before the election when you said a capital gains tax
one more time.
Unfair or ineffective?
This is a report over a long period of time that requires serious consideration.
The Greens are wholeheartedly in support of a comprehensive capital gains tax excluding the family home. So much so that co-leader James Shaw questioned whether the government party should be re-elected if they couldn't get one across the line. Today he too said the governing parties had to come to a joint position despite his previous comments.
I think it's pretty clear what Green Party policy is. It hasn't changed in the last 20 years, but we are a member of the government and it is our responsibility over the course of the next few weeks to kind of work through all of those recommendations and come up with a package that the government takes to the people. 3
of the 11 working group members from Business New Zealand, a former Bell Gully tax partner and a former Inland Revenue Deputy Commissioner produced a minority report saying they want to see a more limited capital gains tax. While they accept the case for extracting more tax out of the residential housing market, they believe it could be done through other ways. Their report says including business and intangible assets like goodwill will only increase the level of complexity and compliance costs. Any changes adopted would not come into effect this term, and New Zealanders would get the chance to vote on any proposals in 2020. Now the pressure comes on all three governing parties. Labour and the Greens to deliver a capital gains tax strong enough to address the inequities in the tax system they've railed against, and New Zealand First to keep faith with the voters who took the party at its word before the last election. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.